All right, so this is really awesome news because, of course, it means that we get a Fish of Fury strategy that works way better than it did before. It means that we can have things like breachers in particular hop out of Devilfish and pew pew their way across the board the turn that we move. So that it makes things a lot easier based on the core rules. We don't have to use emergency debarkation or anything like that necessarily to get that that rapid deployment up board. So I think that alone is pretty exciting. It, of course, also means for Tau that they're much more vulnerable to transports, right? I mean, there's only a few units that we have that we can put in transports that this is really a good thing for. There are tons and tons of enemy units that can use this to much more effect, right? So it's a little scary from a defensive standpoint, but it does open up some really cool play with Devilfish. Another thing that is important about that is, like, where is it down here? Where's the impulse thing? I think it's right here, right? Yeah. So minus a couple exceptions, Space Marine transports no longer care whether a Primaris unit is riding in the back or not. So I don't know if that's going to be a broad thing. I mean, certainly for Primaris versus Firstborn Marines, that's a big deal because there's this kind of somewhat artificial enforced distinction between Firstborn and Primaris Marines, and that you basically had two different armies within the same codex. But here, if that gets applied broadly, right, it would be really cool if we could have crewed in transports, right? If there's no more restrictions about who can get in, that'd be cool. I doubt it, right? Like I can't imagine that crewed are really going to end up in Devilfish, but it would be nice, right? That would be a nice way to keep some crewed alive. It would, of course, limit the amount of crew models you could put in a unit, and that in itself would be something that would be an interesting trade-off, right? But it would be it would open up some different ways of play that we've never had available to us before. Back up here, keep looking. Right, it talks about in the past, certain open-top vehicles allow troops inside to fire out. That's to be replaced with the firing deck X rule. So instead of having units fire out of things like a mirror or a raider or something like that, the transports that have this special rule basically adopt the weapons. And so, I mean, it's essentially like embarked drones or attached drones, which makes me wonder if that's going to affect the way drones work. I mean, maybe there's some streamlining here where drones are essentially Devilfish essentially have the firing deck rule, but the drones are the only thing that can utilize the firing deck slots or something like that. That might be how they handle that. But yeah, so having open top vehicles adopt the weapons of their embarked units is an interesting change because, of course, it allows those transports to use those weapons and benefit from buffs simultaneously. So, it used to be that if you're embarked in a transport, you couldn't be affected by any type of abilities. Now, that doesn't matter because the unit, the transport itself is going to be firing those weapons, and that is a pretty big deal. A lot of these things, are that transport. We don't have transports in Tau that are open topped. I mean, technically we do. We have piranhas are open top vehicles, but they're not actually transports or anything, right? So it doesn't actually work that way. That'd be cool though if you could have the fire warrior pilots shoot their pistols out or something. That'd be neat. Right, yes, and so that's the point they're making here with the mech, as the mech gets to augment a vehicle. Yes, and then, all right, some vehicles, however, circumvent the rules entirely with special abilities, such as fast movers like the Impulsor and the Astromilton Taurox, who can disembark troops even after advancing. That is something really cool. I really like that. It's kind of a way to make those vehicles feel better, more mobile, and I would hope that would be something that, did they say, yeah, Impulsors, Torx. I would hope that would be something that would be fairly common amongst Xeno skimmers, right? So I'd hope that would be something that we would see with, like the Elder transports and Tau transports. That would make sense, but you know, we have to wait and see. The Land Raider reclaims this assault ramp, meaning that it can charge out of the vehicle, which is awesome for Determinators. Like, that's just a super cinematic narrative thing that should be part of the rules. But that opens up a special rule for Land Raiders. It's not something that they are really suggesting is going to be broadly applied, and to some extent that makes sense because they're really focusing on Marines and Tyranids and sprinkling in some additional factions for flavor, I suppose, in these previews. But the fact that they're making that an option is cool, right? It means that at least some vehicles are going to have this type of capability. Obviously, for Tau, that's not going to be any of them. But it does mean that we have to be aware of those types of threats, meaning that assault in general from transports is going to be more of a thing, right? We have to worry about assault out of certain transports. We have to certainly worry about firing after transports move. And overall, I think that suggests a much more dynamic type of gameplay. Right? We're going from transports being kind of, transports were in a really weird position in 8th and 9th edition where, they offered survivability, but not necessarily the level of maneuverability you would hope that they would have, or at least the maneuverability that you would think about them having in your head. So being able to move the vehicle, hop out, shoot, makes a lot of sense, and it's something that's going to make armies play a lot faster if they have transports, which they should be, right? They're being transported. They have an example here of mobile command vehicle. Dude can pop out of the Chimera, issue orders. That's cool. You would hope that is a fairly common type of upgrade because lots of vehicles have these hatches, right? Like if we're talking about the dude popping out of a hammerhead or the guy popping out of a rhino or anything, right? Like those are all places where you could have somebody do something like this, right? And so maybe the command vehicle functionality isn't going to be that uncommon. I don't know. Certainly not for orders, right? Because that's a guard thing. But it would be nice if Ethereal could hop out of a Delphish and do something. Great tanks, right? So they have the Falcon here. Falcon says, in your shooting phase, after the model has shot, select one enemy unit hit by one or more of those attacks until the end of the turn. Each time a friendly model that disembarked from this transport this turn makes an attack that targets that enemy unit, you can re-roll the wound roll, which is that's a pretty massive buff, right? Like being able to re-roll wounds flat out is always a powerful ability. And having your vehicle really offer that level of support to your, fire dragons, your dark reapers, whatever's hopping out of here, that's awesome. And you would think that this level of interaction between embarked units and transports would be something that they would be looking to do more broadly, right? That vehicles are not, or transports are not just boxes to move dudes around, but instead offer some distinct benefits to the functionality of those units. So maybe this type of fire support benefit is, the elders thing, maybe Tau get some sort of like marker like benefit just for being next to a vehicle, right? And that's there are stratagems that do that, right? That I think it's coordinated engagement. Or is it anyway, right? Like there are stratagems that interact with marker lights and devilfish, right? And so you could see that sort of functionality being moved into a unit ability just like this, which would be awesome. I don't know, what do you all think about these transport rules? Put in chat. I think let's see here. Yeah, there's supposed to be scrolling chat on the side of the stream here. I have no idea why it's not working. At least I think it's working. That's why the screen has a big gray spot on the side. Yeah, onboard sensors. That's what it is. Yeah, onboard sensors moving from a strat to the devilfish ability, just like this. Yeah. I would too also prefer the repulsor ability, just being able to hop into a devilfish. Well, if you get charged, that would be awesome. And I mean, either one of those are really good, and would be certainly thematic for Tau. So I could go either way on that, but. There we go. All right. So I'm sure you've all seen this before, right? And you probably saw the transport rules already today too. We're a little late in the day, right? But right. So this is the preview from yesterday about how they're consolidating the battle round. And so there's command phase, movement phase, shooting phase, charge phase, fight phase. Gone are like morale phase. Gone are psychic phase. We didn't really care about psychic phase, so that's fine. I really think it's interesting that psychic abilities are essentially, they have the psychic keyword. We don't know if that has some functionality or if it's just a keyword that helps differentiate the type of attack, right? Like I think one of the psychic hood ability, gives them feel no pain of 4+ against psychic attack. So if the psychic keyword here just keys for things like that, or if it requires some sort of mechanic, like you have to roll a 2+ or whatever. But it seems like for the most part they just go off like a normal weapon, right? You have to shoot it just like a normal weapon, and so smite being moved from mortal wounds to just another shooting attack is fine. Like you get D6 and each of them does D3. That's not bad, right? Like it's not as good as mortals, but you can target it. You can bring it against a particular opponent or a particular unit. You don't have to just go for the closest one. There's some functionality there that's different and not necessarily worse. So I think that's interesting. I think it's going to feel not very good, right? Like I think it's going to feel boring. One of the big things that they've had in the past, going like from 3rd, 4th, 5th edition, is they've had a variety of versions of psychic powers. And one thing that has popped up multiple times is trying to make psychic powers feel more arcane, right? Making them feel more of the warp and more unpredictable and powerful and dangerous. Turning it into just a shooting attack or an ability doesn't really feel that way, right? It's a benefit. It's nice, but it doesn't feel different from anything else in terms of the mechanic. So that is something that doesn't really affect me as a Tau player, right? Because getting dudes smote or having them shot is exactly the same mechanic for me. It's me just picking them up and put them on the side of the board. But for the person doing them, it doesn't feel the same. So, I wonder about that. Right. I like the integration of things like sustained hits, devastating wounds, hazardous, right? Like we can really see how these keywords are starting to come together and create unique functionality of different types of weapons and apparently powers. The big thing though is, yes, yeah. So the fact that Smite doesn't do mortal wounds, gives us a save, is a huge deal for us as Tau players because we need that save, right? So that is a big deal here for us defensively. And it's hard to read too much into that though. Like, is the lack of mortal wounds in this psychic power indicative of a stripping of mortal wounds from psychic powers in general? Like, is that going to be a far between thing? I don't know. But certainly Smite being a ubiquitous, or at least seemingly ubiquitous rule, I guess it's not, right? It's not, because like, look, if we look at weird boys can't smite, right? They have Edbanger, which is a psychic ranged attack. They don't have smite, and that doesn't do mortal wounds. It just does damage, right? So both of these psychic abilities that they're previewing here don't generate mortal wounds. So maybe they are restricting smite as a particular ability, and also rolling back the amount of mortal wounds that are done through psychics. So the fact that it has a ballistic skill, right, is the ballistic skill is just a mechanic, right? And in the past we've conceptualized that as someone's ability to fire their weapon and hit their target, but there's no reason why that same mechanic can't be applied to their ability to harness the warp and aim it at their target. We call it ballistic skill, but functionally it could be the same thing. But yeah, it is a little weird that's called that, but I think it still works just fine. Right, so Battle Shock. They say morale is even simpler. That all gets sorted in your command phase, which is nice that it's at the beginning of your phase, not at the end of the phase. I think that's way easier to remember, right? Right. I think the hardest thing about morale in the past few editions has been that it happens at the end of the player turn, and you are basically like trying to move on to the next thing, right? And so it's the last thing at the end of the turn. It's fairly easy to overlook because of that. Having it happen at the beginning of the turn alleviates that a little bit and helps you in the way that it's, I don't know, I guess functionally it's very similar because the end of your opponent's turn versus the beginning of your turn, but I think it's just a little bit more streamlined that way. Right, it says roll a 2d6 for every unit that's below half strength. That means that they're a squad with less than half their starting models, or a single model with less than half of their starting wounds. It's a really important distinction, right? That means that like riptides, monsters, vehicles can suffer battle shock, which is kind of wild to me, that you can have a monster that is presumably scaling down, going down in its abilities, and then also suffering this battle shock. That's pretty rough. I suppose that is somewhat analogous though to a normal multi-model unit though, because they are also going down in strength by losing models. So they're losing guns, they're losing wounds in the same way. So maybe it's not that different, but it certainly does require a little bit of a recontextualizing, a reevaluation of how we imagine these different units functioning on the tabletop. right? And so if you roll the 2d6 and you roll equal to or above the leadership characteristic, you're good. If you don't, then you suffer the battle shock effect. Yeah, higher than leadership is new, definitely. But leadership itself is totally reimagined, restructured, right? So now having a low leadership is really good, right? Having a high leadership is bad. Yeah, I would assume that accompanying drones won't count towards morale. I would assume that too. I think that's probably a safe bet, but not a guaranteed one, especially in index hammer, right? So if you take battle shock, it says in the step, you take the battle shock test. If a unit fails, they can't control objectives because their objective control characteristic is 0. If they fall back, they have to take a desperate escape test, which probably means that you roll die for each dude, and on a 1 they die or something. And its controlling player cannot use stratagems to affect that unit. So those are really massive impacts, right? Like if you have a unit that's below half strength, whether it's a Riptide or a unit of Fire Warriors or a unit of Crisis Suits, whatever, and it takes this battle shock test, they're really all they can do is shoot, which is good for us, right? Because for Tau, that's one of the most important things. But they can't control objectives, which is really rough, and you can't use stratagems on them. We don't really have a sense of how well stratagems are going to work, or like how many stratagems you're going to use, or anything like that. So my guess is that that's probably less of an essential thing as it is in 9th, right? Like in 9th, you have tons of stratagems. You're burning them to do all sorts of things every turn. I think stratagems in 10th are going to be more selective, right? And they're going to be used for those big one-off type of things. But you might not want to use those on a unit that's below half strength anyway, depending on what it is. So that's not necessarily as impactful as we might think on the surface. The fact that you can't control objectives, though, that's really rough, right? Because the places where you lose models is going to be on objectives, and so stripping those models away, even big units, right? Even if you have 15 dudes on an objective, if that was a 30-man unit, and you fail your battle shock test, they're gone, like they're useless, which is wild. My guess, my assumption, this just seems like really low-hanging fruit for an ethereal, right? Like I feel like ethereals will do something to prevent this, right? Like that units within 9 inches don't suffer battle shock or something like that, right? Like it just seems like that would be a really clear role for an ethereal. Maybe you lose some of the functionality that they have right now in terms of like inspiring presence, but they get this benefit for battle shock. That would make a lot of sense to me. Or you get a subtract 2 from your roll or something. That would make sense to me. But being able to manipulate this in any way is going to be really powerful. And importantly for shooting armies like Tau, it means that you can get a lot of benefit by just reducing things to below half strength, right? If you can just get them below half strength, then there's a chance that they're going to fail their battle shock test, and then their threat to you is much lower. And that's useful because, of course, it's easier to target units when they're larger. It's harder to hide them when they're larger, and so being able to work against these units and kind of whittle multiple units down to below half strength, and not necessarily have to get the last handful of guys out of that unit. You don't have to dig them out. You don't have to go and deep strike a unit or bring your cold star back there just to take the last couple of guys out if they're shit in their pants because they failed Battle Shock. So I would think that this is going to be a really interesting change. Like, I think this is way more interesting than the changes to psychic powers, because it affects every army for one thing, but it also totally changes the way you play the game. The psychic thing changes, the physical mechanics, like when do I roll the dice and what dice do I roll. But this Battle Shock rule is very reminiscent of some of the older versions of Warhammer, both fantasy and 40K, and does make a really big difference for how you actually behave, the choices that you make. So that's really cool. I think it's awesome. Yeah, squad half dead is kind of the way to think about it. And I just, it has me really excited thinking about, having, you have your, kind of looking at both of these previews together, right? We have this preview about transports and having models be able to hop out of transports after the move, providing this really dynamic style of play. And then we also have this change in Battle Shock where there's really going to be emphasis on getting units to below half strength. So if we are looking at those two things together, it seems like having those units in transports strictly with the idea of, kind of throwing them against some targets to get them below half strength, or maybe you have kind of your backline, like your crisis suits, your broadsides, your riptides, your hammerheads, whatever it is. Maybe those units are the ones that are really working to strip models away at first, and then you go in with your vehicle and you have your troops in there, and they have a high objective control characteristic, right? Then they can hop out, they can shoot some more to whittle away other units. But the transport rule now is to protect them, is to get them to the place, protect them from Battle Shock, allow them to use their weapons in a really synergistic way, where you don't have to totally, they don't have to do all the work, right? Like, the transport, as always, is a shell around the troop unit, but you're able to move that up, hop them out, and you're kind of getting a 2-for-1 now, right? If you can not only have a high objective control unit on the board, but then also take away your opponent's objective control characteristic, that's huge. And that's kind of one of the things that I was excited about when the Codex came out, right? Is the I'm totally the multi-sensory disruption array, whatever that that relic is. The thing that basically removes objective control from, or objective secured from a opponent. That sort of thing is now just built into Battle Shock, and that's really powerful. If you can have objective control and take it away from an opponent's, then it makes it very hard for them to dislodge you from that target. So I'm excited about that. I think a Fish of Fury build seems like it has a lot of attractive elements about it, just based on these rules. Who knows how the points and everything work out. But the other thing, though, about this is it's not clear to me, it seems like this would happen every turn, right? Every time you're below half strength, you have to do this. It seems like it's persistent, because it just says every unit that's below half strengths for every unit, right? So it's not on the turn that they fall below half strength or anything like that. It's persistent. So if they get nuked turn 1, they're spending their whole game trying to pass these Battle Shock tests, which is really interesting. It's going to be a lot. It's really going to be about protecting your units from this early on, to make sure that they have the capabilities that you need them to have when it counts. Oh, well, there has to be a stratagem that negates this, right? Like, no, you can't. There can't be, right? Because you can't use stratagems to affect the Battle Shock. But maybe, but but that's if they're battle shocked, right? So there has to be a stratagem still that allows you to auto pass the check, right? There has to be one that allows you to auto pass the check, and then that bypasses this altogether. You would think, right? Yeah. Hey, Atomic. Yeah. So that's the preview. I don't know. I thought I would give this a shot, see how it goes. I don't know if the technicals really are there for it to work out, but it was fun looking at this stuff and at least getting something out there where we get a look at this. So let me know what you think in the comments below if you're watching this after the fact. Otherwise, I will see you on Friday for a hobby stream and a few other videos in between then. So I have some stuff coming up about some new dice, which I'm really excited about. So again, thanks. Happy wargaming, everyone. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you want to pick up one of the Invasive Wargaming models before they become unavailable, head on over to the Invasive Wargaming Etsy store in the description below. Also, if you like this video, you should know that it is made possible by my kind sponsor, the Magnet Baron, as well as the excellent folks over on Patreon. If you want to support the channel, you can certainly hop on over there and join our community. Special thanks to Shifty, Durza, Everett Keller, Stephen Cowan, Jack Inacker, Jared Egler, and Scott Heater.